Good morning, good afternoon, good evening, depending on where you're coming from. Welcome to our second EUIO Digital Summer Residency discussion on the future of orchestras. We're going to try and take a look at the question, what will the world of classical music and orchestras look like in the coming years? If you're watching this broadcast, you're either on YouTube Live or Facebook Live, and using the chat function on both of these platforms, we can take your questions as we go, and we really encourage you to get involved and ask questions at any point through the session. Today's guest, I'm delighted to say, is Antonio Pappano, Music Director of the Royal Opera House, Covent Garden since 2002, Music Director of the Orchestra Nazionale di Santa Cecilia in Rome since 2005, and somebody who's played and performed with just about all the major orchestras and venues and festivals in the world. So, Tony, welcome.
Thank you very much.
Great to see you. So look, we've got about an hour with you, which is just fantastic. You've given your time as we look at this question of where are things going. Let me just ask you, how have things been in the last few months? Are you now actually working properly, or are you just kind of, how are things for you? How does it work?
I've just experienced a remarkable period of a month in Italy. Believe it or not, my orchestra and myself have done a cycle of the Beethoven symphonies. Now, yes, outdoors, but we did 5 concerts, and the brilliant thing, the miraculous thing, was that the audience actually came. We had a limit of 1,000 people. We have an amphitheater set up in the building of the Parco della Musica, the auditorium, if you like, in Rome. And it was remarkable. The people came. We were sold out, almost sold out all of the time, and sold out really most of the time. It was just remarkable. And we were in Genoa the other night. We did the first concert under the new bridge that's just been built. It was on a construction site. It was remarkable, a real Italian affair, if you like. But it was very moving and very special. Then we went to the Torre del Lago Puccini Festival in Tuscany. We did some Puccini up there, also with some Beethoven. That's a program that I don't recommend, but it went great. But and tonight we're in Caserta in the south of Italy.
Oh wow, beautiful!
So, look, I mean, all of these events are outdoor events, and of course, with the weather being what it is in Italy, there is a kind of a guarantee that you can take the risk to plan outdoor events. So that we've been very lucky, but it's more to it than that. The Italians have been in a severe lockdown, and maybe contrary to the character of the Italians, they've actually gone along with it and been very, very strict, and the mask wearing and all that. And I think that that's allowed us now here to be one step ahead of the rest of the world. Look, the Rome Opera put on, again, outdoors, but put on a fully staged production of Rigoletto. Now, there were a lot of it was about film and live filming and the sort of new technologies to mitigate the distancing that was obviously necessary. The other thing that's very, very important to know is that though my orchestra, in this Beethoven cycle that we did, were distanced. So in other words, what that means is a meter between the string players. They have their own desks, if you like, their own music stands, and there's a meter and a half between the winds, and then 3 meters with. Oh, wow. Behind them, the brass. You adapt. They adapt. It got, the obvious, the people at the back, of course, you're working to get the ensemble just so that they're not late because of the distance. But that, you do that anyway in a normal situation. And I must say the orchestra adapted so beautifully. And the fact that you have space around the sound added a new dimension somehow, a new way
That's a
of
very interesting thing. Yeah. So do you think you think this is actually helping us to discover a new acoustic way of orchestras playing, where actually you're surrounded more by a little bit of space, and that how does that change the sound?
Well, I must say I'm surprised to hear myself say that it is a positive, because I'm always complaining to my orchestra that sit closer, sit closer, sit closer,
Yeah.
because everybody, they've got the room, and so they take the room. It's Murphy's law, but actually what's been enhanced is the intensity of the listening, the discipline of the rehearsals is incredible. And this is not the easiest thing to manage sometimes when people are together and they chat, and so the attention span becomes less. This has created almost a utopian situation. The sound, it's in the when we're rehearsing in the hall with no amplification, because of course outdoors you're going to need some kind of amplification. And by the way, the systems in use in Italy, at least that I've experienced recently, have been very good indeed. I think the sound there's a richness to it, and there's a freedom to it. The wind players will tend to play louder at first because they feel themselves as soloists. They don't have their partner sitting next to
Surely
them.
not. Yeah.
And but once you establish the hierarchy in terms of volume and who is the protagonist when, again, work that you would do anyway, but maybe in this setup a little bit to a greater degree. But it's quite fascinating. I think there's a richness to the sound. Of course, when you've got very, very difficult hair trigger rhythmic things, those would require extra work and extra attention, and therefore the situation might not be ideal.
So it's interesting actually. What you're finding after quite a few concerts, it seems, is a real intense focus that people are now having in rehearsing it, and musicians in working. I suppose it's natural in a way. This situation, a few months of this disaster and crisis, we come back and actually the musicians are responding with an amazing focus in what they do.
The hunger to play was something that you can't imagine. I mean, at
Yeah.
Covent Garden, when I did 3 streaming concerts, the second of which was with chamber orchestra. We did the Song of the Earth, Das Lied von der Erde, of Mahler in the Schoenberg arrangement, and the degree of engagement is like of relief to be playing. I can't tell you what that was. That genuinely moving, and it shows you also the impulse, what we are as musicians, and what orchestras are, the need to play, together, and the need to create a community voice, to express something, and to release that which is in us. Again, I mean, of course, it sounds maybe poetic and maybe even corny, but it was definitely true. But can you imagine an orchestra coming back, an Italian orchestra coming back after 4 months of severe lockdown? For a long time, unless they had a dog, they were not even allowed to go for a walk with their children. I mean, that's that kind of severe. That to come back and do an entire Beethoven cycle with rehearsals, because those works are so full of rhythmic energy and a dynamism that has never been equaled. It's been like a medicine, like a shot of somehow speed. I say that in the positive sense.
It's all right. We do music. We don't need speed. We have music instead.
No, but it's been necessary, and it's been necessary.
So it's quite interesting. This, I mean, what does this tell you? I mean, this first of all, in Italy, audiences are returning. That's what you're saying. Strong message.
Definitely.
And secondly, this extraordinary energy that the players are now bringing to their work. But what does this say to you about the future? Because that's what everybody is asking, and especially, young players with the European Union Youth Orchestra. That's what we're doing with people mainly in their 20s. And the question is, I think, is not even just, what's going to happen over the next few months, but do you think this is going to bring real permanent change? Or is it a kind of huge blip, which eventually, as and when and if we get a vaccine, we will get back to normal? What's your view about that in terms of what orchestras will be like? Do you think this will change orchestras radically or not?
Well, it's very difficult to say specifically because, first of all, the data changes every week. Um, you take 2 steps forward, 1 step
Yeah,
back. The politicians are, as far as we are concerned, in the arts, they don't really understand what our world is. But I will say this, that I think that musicians have been forced to look at what it takes to survive.
yeah,
And I think that the "we are all in this together" attitude, and having the courage to make concessions to keep an organization on its feet, is something that, of course, the unions are there to support the players, to support people. People have to make a living, but we also have to have an organization that is going to provide a job. So I think the shock that organizations could fall and die is really there.
yeah.
So I think I don't really have a crystal ball for what the future will bring. I just know that we better do this together, because if there becomes a mighty struggle between the employee and the employer, I think we're going to be in big trouble. That's one thing. I think, look, on the short term, touring is going to take a huge hit. I'm very frustrated. I've gotten on a few planes in the last month, and I see that they're full, and that there's no distancing. And yes, there are masks, but there's no distancing. You get on the bus to get to the plane, and you're like sardines. The tube, the metro, the same. In England, bars, swimming pools, gyms, all that stuff is open. Theaters that are much bigger spaces, and people, are not doing. Why are we being punished to the degree? Is it because, yes, well, to get 1,000 people in there, yes, but they're all wearing masks, and for a time, yes, we can we can lessen that number. But the fact of the matter is, at the end of the day, the big organizations in a place like England, which gets so little subsidy from the government, cannot survive with this. That's just not going to happen. So I'm sorry not to be able to give you a specific answer of how the future is going to be. We're making it up as we go along right now.
No, I mean, when I was asking that, I mean, obviously you're right. Who knows how long this will go and in what way? But I guess the thing is, at some point, a vaccine or vaccines will come along and will. So there'll be some kind of normality at that point. That's why I'm looking much further ahead. And my question really is, do you think that this is changing orchestras and musicians? Or do you think that once I don't know, maybe we're talking 3 or 4 years ahead, but do you think this will change the way music happens and works? Or do you think we will go back more or less to a similar kind of thing once in a few years' time? Because I'm thinking of players who are going to be, their working life is the next 30, 40 years.
Yes.
Again, difficult question, but I'm just interested whether the change in musicians you're seeing in managements is something that you think will lead through eventually to a kind of new landscape or not?
I think the experimentation we're doing right now with changing the programming, forced into a situation where we have to obey protocols that are not usually there, has made us creative and made us rethink the concert experience. Some people, some organizations already do that. They have a wonderful modern and fresh approach to concert programming. But many organizations now, many musical organizations are forced into that kind of thinking. This is only good. And,
Yeah.
and I think if we can, because, you know, the fact of the matter is that it's very easy for the classical music world to gather dust, you know, because the concert going experience is very, certainly the cliche of, you know, the orchestra comes out in their penguin suits and people pay the ticket and they come and the conductor comes out and the concert happens, and it's usually of music of dead white composers. That potentially has the chance of really being questioned in the future, that we can look at it differently because we were forced into it. And I think that brings, and if the audiences see it that way and have been sort of shaken up a little bit, shocked into saying, God, maybe things don't have to be the same, they can be different, then we can continue to be creative in a way we didn't even imagine. I think that's
sorry, yeah. So this is an interesting question. I mean, dead white composers. You know, what is your view about how we should be approaching this issue?
Well, very interesting. I was the president of a jury of the first international Luciano Berio composition competition that was under the auspices of the Santa Cecilia Orchestra, and we had several important composers on the panel, and we had many scores to go through. Do you know the winner turned out to be from the I never can say this right, from the Uyghur, a Muslim minority in
the Uyghur.
Yeah, is that how you say it?
I don't know whether it's correct. That's what I've heard is the Uyghurs, but whether it's correct, I don't know. It's a strange spelling.
But it's remarkable that this is a people who are going, especially right now, going through a hugely difficult time. And this guy, I mean, the level of accomplishment was just incredible. You know, as we know, there are many things going on. Black Lives Matter, but not only. I think that we've not only been awakened, but we're forced to confront issues. Issues of inclusivity, people being considered for all kinds of roles, different people who are, you know, not white and pasty like we are, but and who are who are a part of our business and that need to be a part of our business, and that are part of the family. And I think, you know, our generation, Marshall, that we've always been open to this. I don't really see a problem. The struggle comes when one is forced to make decisions about how do you say this? Forced to make decisions that seem political rather than obeying the meritocracy. And I think that people have to understand that in an important organization, people are going to take the best people there. Now, whether they're white, they're yellow, they're black, they're, you know, I'm talking about orchestras now, singers in certain roles. And I've never, ever, I can say this personally, I've never been made a decision based on color, or it's just not even been in my thinking.
Yeah, it's an interesting thing, this. I mean, yesterday we had an orchestra meeting, and one of the players mentioned this article that was in the New York Times, which was saying that actually there was how there are screens have been used a lot for auditions in the States for a long time, and there's actually now an article saying, it's time to stop doing this, because actually it's just it is the wrong approach, and actually you need to just be open and honest about what you're hearing. So it's quite an interesting thing that the politics may demand something, but
let's explain to the listeners that basically the screens in audition process were so that somebody plays behind the screen so you don't know who it is. Basically, it could be your best friend or your student who's there, and so he would have an unfair advantage if it was known that he was that person. That's where it came from, basically. To me, I don't like the screens because I think they impede the sound, and I think and I think the player's body language has as much to do with the sound that's emanating from them, the spirit that's emanating from them.
Yeah.
For me, it's not a race issue. It's more that I think that it's a human being. It's not a machine playing the instrument. So, but you see what I mean? That the idea was conceived to protect players.
Yeah. Interesting. And actually, it's very interesting what you were saying then about the composers. This afternoon, our next session in this thing about orchestras is actually with two women composers, one white, one non-white. We do need to open that conversation. Listen, everybody listening in, if you've got any questions you want to ask Tony, do let us know. You can put those into your chat, and we can see what comes out of that if you have any questions. Whilst we wait on that, I wanted to ask you, what's your ideal orchestra to work with? I don't need names, although you can give them if you want. But I mean, what's the kind of approach and type of music? What are the types of musicians? The orchestra, when you come and play, we've worked with all of them, so many of the major orchestras. Which are the ones where you think, yeah, this is great. This is what I need.
Well, the first thing, my experience is that I love orchestras that have a mixed with different age groups, where you have veterans, where you have the real kind of the people who have their first job, and people in between, because there's an incredible amount of bouncing off each other that I think is only good for the orchestra. You need the veterans who have the experience, who have the knowledge of color, of nuance, of timing in an orchestra. It's not you just play when the conductor comes down with the beat. But there's a human reaction. And with every orchestra, that's very, very different. I love orchestras that have somehow protected a special sound that they've cultivated over many, many years. Now, that can be very difficult for the conductor, because if his way of hearing or her way of hearing is based on a completely different sound, there's going to be some kind of tug of war. I think it's very interesting. I went to the Dresden Staatskapelle for the first time, and I conducted Rachmaninoff's Second Symphony. And in the first rehearsal, I didn't quite know what to make of the situation, because I found it difficult pulling them with me. And then I realized from the second rehearsal on, wait a minute, At the end of the first rehearsal, there was some sounds that I heard that I've never heard from any other orchestra. I said, ah, that's it. And so I then realized that I had to work to pull them with me, but with that sound that they need to have as they. And so when I again just made a step into their world rather than telling them what to do, it was miraculous, because then they came along, and it was a very, very special experience, and one born of an amazing history, and the way they recruit players, it's extremely rigorous, and they will only take on a player only if they're very, very, very sure, because they want to make sure that they're preserving something that is unique. I love that, an orchestra that is unique.
Yeah, that's very interesting. So, I mean, this question of kind of the orchestras, we do know them. There are these orchestras that have sounds. I mean, you remind me also of our rehearsal director, Peter Stark, who was doing a conducting class with some of the players once, and he stopped one of the guys conducting, and he said, you have to understand, conducting, you're surfing a wave, and you can shape what happens, but you actually got to use the wave. It's there. And I don't know what you think about that.
Absolutely. The waves, it's very interesting. When an experienced conductor gets on the podium, this shaping that you talked about can affect actually the consistency of the wave, but the direction of the wave. When I say consistency, is it a big wave? Is it a small wave? Is it a baby wave? Is it a monster? But I think the image is right, and when I think you've got to have a really good reason to want to slice through something rather than bend it.
Yeah. No, that's great. And your comment also about this thing of when orchestras with many different age groups and experience, it's so reflects. I remember when I joined the BBC Symphony Orchestra way back in the 1970s. It really was. I felt with my desk partner, it was often that it was my energy, my young energy, and her experience. And if we both listened to each other's positive side, that's when the kind of the marriage of the sound could really work well. But I think that's a fascinating thing for young players to think about when you go into an orchestra. Be aware what you bring and what the orchestra's experience brings, and kind of meld that.
Absolutely. Look, when you're young and you've got all this technique and you've got all this energy, sometimes music doesn't need technique and doesn't need energy. I mean, energy, youthful energy. It needs sometimes a deep, considered energy, a focused energy. And so, just because one can play faster or can, or has endless amounts of breath, listen to your stand partner, because they will, if the person has more experience than you, because they will teach you things that you had no idea weren't even important.
Yeah. So with that context in mind, I mean, a big question is, what is your advice to young players who are just coming into the profession? They're probably doing some freelancing. They may have just finished college. What's your advice about how to approach that career in front of you as a player in an orchestra?
Well, I think the very important thing is to keep playing chamber music as you're looking and trying to get little gigs, jobs around. Chamber music is hugely important because basically orchestra playing is chamber music on a very large scale. So to keep honing those skills, listening, figuring out the architecture of music, and because most of the classical canon is based on sonata form, and therefore the symphonic form, you're going to learn a lot from playing, Beethoven trios, the string quartets, quintets, you name it, because they are basically symphonies, those pieces. And I think they prepare you for the kind of structures that you will be playing in an orchestra. Stick close, to teachers. Ask questions when you meet important players. Try to create a network. Try to find out what's out there. Try to travel. Don't be afraid to travel. You might even risk learning a new language. I think that's very, very important. It's been hugely important in my life. And because it will, learning a different language can only enhance your ability to take in what other cultures have to offer. I think that's a huge thing. Keep your sense of curiosity. If you're young enough to be in the youth orchestras, keep auditioning for them. You're going to play with important conductors. You're going to learn a lot, and you're going to be able to, again, create a network, of contacts. Don't be shy about that kind of thing. Sometimes you have to go looking for the experiences rather than them coming to you. Learn, and this is very important. When I think every orchestra, at the end of the day, when you go and audition for an orchestra, of course you play your first movement of the concerto and maybe the cadenza, and then they ask you to play a classical Mozart concerto or Beethoven concerto, whatever, and then you're asked to play a romantic concerto, and it's all great, and you may be Heifetz, or you may be Heinz Holliger on the oboe, you may be the greatest player in the world. Learn your excerpts. Learn the context of the orchestral excerpts, because you will be judged on those. Everybody can be very impressed about your playing, but if you mess up on those excerpts, especially in opera houses, by the way, that you go in and you play in the wrong tempo, you don't pay any attention to the dynamics, you misread notes. That stuff, don't take it lightly. I can't stress that enough.
So it's interesting. You said just then, learn your excerpts, but you also said learn the context, and I think that's an interesting area. You mean it's not just knowing what those notes do, but you need to understand where is the harmony there, where is the all the rest of.
Put on a record and hear what in real life it is. We've got so much technology at our disposal. So use YouTube, use it, find that little excerpt and see how it really works in real life. What is the degree of passion, the degree of surge that you need to play as a string player, the opening of Rosenkavalier, Richard Strauss. How fast is that accelerando? How ecstatic does it become? Maybe read the context. What is the music describing? Was describing this 35-year-old lady in bed with a 17-year-old man, and they're making love, and a climax is reached. I mean, this is stuff, I'm not making this up. This is what it is.
I know.
And for the music really, really is incredibly descriptive. And if you know that little kernel of information, the level of abandon that you have when you play that will be absolutely recognized by the panels.
Yeah, and look, it's interesting, Tony. You've spent a lot of time conducting opera, but you also conduct a lot of symphony orchestras. Do you think that players in those orchestras are fundamentally different kind of animals, or not? I'm just thinking of players who are thinking of which direction they might want to go in. Do you see that difference? Maybe once upon a time an opera orchestra was in the pit. Now opera orchestras might be on the stage as much as on the pit. I don't know what you think.
Yeah, more and more orchestras are playing opera. But there's no question that an opera orchestra is a different animal, I think, to a normal symphony orchestra. Because they listen differently. They're listening to singers' micro nuances and micro shifts in tempo and rubato, the shaping of phrases, breathing. They're so aware, I mean, of that kind of give and take in the music. Hopefully, it's shaped into something that makes sense, but often it isn't. And opera orchestras are remarkable in their level of flexibility, also in the way they are able to really create atmosphere and color and the correct dynamics so that the singers will be heard. It sounds like I'm vying for the opera orchestra. It's just,
Yeah, I feel a vote. The swingometer is definitely moving in that direction at the moment.
it's just I'm so used to the wonder of an opera orchestra. It's a thing of beauty. It really, really is. But if you work like I have with an orchestra for over 15 years now in Rome, I've tried to make them be aware, or I've tried to instill in them the importance of that kind of flexibility, that kind of listening, that for an opera orchestra is very natural. Of course, it's also a question of repertoire. I mean, some musicians don't want to be in a pit. You know,
Yeah.
it can get noisy down there. But the combination of voices and orchestra and the music that is written for that idiom is just magical. Now, when you're on the stage and you're on the front line and you're the highlight, you know, and if you're a solo player, you know, solo oboist, clarinet, bassoon, even the concertmaster, first trumpet, what have you, it's fantastic to be on the stage. Let's face it. And it you know, you're in the limelight. It's just a different thing.
Yeah. Well, this is fascinating. I'm really taken, just going back to this question about, you mentioned a while ago this thing of managements and players, you know, in the current situation are going to need to really work well together. I mean, do you see that is changing that relationship?
Well, I think it's going to be forced into some kind of change, certainly in the short term. I wish my biggest frustration living in the world that I live in, and it goes back also to our little discussion about inclusivity, race, is that somehow even the high-powered people in the business and their organizations and their managers are not able to shift the governments to make music a greater priority in the schools. Because I think that's where it all begins, in the sense that people of all color, creed, need to get exposed to this stuff when they're very, very young. Otherwise, society does that for
Yeah.
you, and then it's a crapshoot. You don't know where it's going to go and how it's going to go. But if there's a level playing field at the beginning, I think we'd have much more integrated orchestras. What's been fantastic over the last years is, you know, there's no more imbalance between female players and male players. A lot of orchestras are mainly female nowadays.
Yeah.
And you have female conductors. That's become, you know, a reality. It's been in an incredibly short time, by the way.
Yes.
And
Yeah.
real talents out there, just fantastic. But I think if the players, the managers, and the music directors can somehow gang up to convince our politicians And again, we're talking about drop in the bucket money here. We're not talking
Yeah.
about, we're drop in the bucket money to create this level playing field. How can you, everybody, inclusivity, and positive race relations, but we're setting positive race relations and inclusivity in the music business. How can that be if it starts out badly with an unlevel playing field? I'm sorry.
Yeah, no, that's true. Look, we've got an interesting question coming here from Andrew McCoy. He says, in a post-COVID world, do you think there'll be greater interest in using technology to reach new and existing audiences? And if so, how would you like to see orchestras and theatres do this?
I think that the technology has shown that it is a part of our reality. We are accepting it, but we really have to accept it. I think we can. I think its greatest use, frankly, is as an educational tool. For instance, during the lockdown, I did these little clips for the Royal Opera House, analyzing little opera scenes from my music room at home, and I did a bunch of them. I got pleasure out of doing them because I felt like I was sharing some knowledge that I have accrued over many years, and also I have a passion for the subject, and I think that the technology helped me reach. When I saw the numbers, 35,000 hits. For watching something about, these are numbers that we in the classical music business are incredible. And I'm just talking about a little clip. I'm not talking about a concert which can have hundreds of thousands, especially if there are stars involved and all that. So that there's no question we have to harness the power of these technologies going forward. But like I said, I have a predilection for using them as sharing tools, as educational tools, because the more information, this is the information age, right? The more information our audiences have, the more they will stick with us, because they're not afraid of it. Classical music has sometimes instills fear in people. Is it elitist? Is it too complex? Is it, oh my God, you have to be brought up in that environment. Not at all. If you have a little information and an open heart and an open mind, I don't think that technology should replace the live experience, because live music is different. It's just on another level of energy and community. The point of live performances is to share it with other people. Coming together, it's society at its best. The whole idea of society coming together and sharing a one-off experience. I think that's huge.
Yeah, no, I'm with you. I think the last few months have kind of shown us that they've been the greatest lesson in our lives of the fact that live is not going away, because we have this need for it. And I know our musicians, they're gagging to get back onto a stage and play. So that's good. Andrew, I don't know whether you want to come back on this, because I don't know whether you had any idea about technology as part of a performance, because Tony's talking very clearly about the power that technology gives us outside of the live performance to educate, to inform, to stimulate, and to engage. But I don't know whether you had in mind something that was a kind of technology in performance. I must say, I remember when I used to play a lot of opera, all I can remember is there was usually one piece of technology that went wrong somewhere in the opera if there was anything complex. You must have come across that. But
before, I saw a performance of Rigoletto done just now, where you had people, there were three guys holding steady cams, filming live, and it was being projected onto the screen. This is done now, so this is not the only time I've seen it done, but it mitigated the distancing, and it created a drama. It was even like a thriller all its own. It was using technology to help us navigate a situation that we were having to deal with.
No, I agree. I was just thinking back. I saw a performance of that extraordinary Chinese Peony Pavilion, in which I'm trying to remember which production it was, where the singers actually had a cam with them, And as they were singing particular arias, which were the most kind of emotionally pregnant ones, they were singing to their own camera in front of them. And so you got this incredible focus on the emotion of what they were doing. I mean, I guess that's a kind of a positive way of bringing that into a live event. And maybe we should be more imaginative about these things in the future.
I have to admit that in terms of opera, I don't like, and I can speak now from experience, having worked with certain directors who use film, even live film. When you have film, an audience is going to look at the film. They're not going to look at the artists on stage. So forget it. Because because the screen necessarily has to be quite big to project to a big theater. So I think it takes away from the artists that are on stage, and I'm for me that kind of use of technology has kind of stained opera productions.
Yeah, no, I'm sure that's right. Actually, Peter Stark is asking an interesting question, which pulls together two things that you've talked about. One is, you said earlier that politicians do not understand our world. Is there any way technology can help in breaking this barrier down?
Well, we're doing the best that we can. I think all music organizations are trying to talk to the converted, to the unconverted, create events, create television events, create forums, chats like this one, to hopefully somehow get the message out to as many people as possible. The politicians, I can tell you that certainly my executive director Alex Beard at the Royal Opera House, and my president here in Rome, Michele Dall'Ongoro, they are constantly talking to the ministers. But there's what is it about the arts that somehow scares the politicians into being overly prudent? I don't know what it is.
Well,
can technology help that? I don't know how more than what we're doing already.
I don't know. It's interesting, and of course, I guess sorry. No, I was going to say that it's interesting, and in England and in Italy, these two places that you have your post, they're probably very different. But I see two things. Number one is money, because I noticed, for example, football players got back to playing very quickly, and that's a contact sport. There's not too much in the way of contact in a symphony orchestra, and I think that has to be to do with television contracts and the huge amounts of money that had to be got onto the road, and that's one thing. And I think the second thing is this fear that politicians are getting themselves involved in something that's not popular enough. I don't know whether it's the right answers, but that's what I see.
But back to the economic side of this. I mean, our business generates a lot of money for the country, and a lot of residual economic benefits to the country. So I don't see the downside here in supporting the arts, and certainly London and other cities in England are meccas, culturally speaking, and draw to tourism and draw people to restaurants and to hotels and the like. And so this is money.
Yeah, no, I mean, you're quite right. The UK creative industries, I can't remember what the figures are, but it's many billions of pounds, even more billions of euros. And it is a bizarre fact that governments don't seem to see that. Anyway, that's an area we got to get those. But I mean, I guess we just have to keep banging that table. So look, if there are any further questions, we'll probably wrap up soon. But it's great having you here, Tony. your energy is so important, and also I may say, you talked about the way technology has been used in your work in television programs. I mean, the kind of the Opera Italia, those sorts of things, just are so fantastic in engaging a broader audience. We've got another question coming in here. Do you think that the era of artists traveling all over the world, continent hopping, will change? It was already under discussion for ecological reasons, but do you expect artists and organizations to take distance traveling into account more seriously? Thank you. It's been really interesting. Well, thank you for that, Jose Maria.
That's a very good question.
Mm.
And as it pertains certainly to the opera side of things, I don't know how it's all going to turn out, because opera singers, famous opera singers, but not only the big opera stars, most opera singers travel. Um, they they do a stint of about 6 weeks in one opera house, and they go to another opera house, and and the big stars want to be seen in New York, in Vienna, in Paris, in London, in Milan. They have their audiences. Um, Before, and this is very interesting, it used to be that, like for instance, in Caruso's time, so I'm talking in the 1910s, the 1920s, artists were beholden to a company. They would sing many different roles for that company. It's a utopian situation where you'd have a company of singers. It used to be that way at the English National Opera, and to a certain extent it is, but to a much lesser extent. And it used to be that way at Covent Garden many years ago. We used to have a kind of ensemble and bring in guests from time to time, way before my time. There are questions as to whether we should somehow get back to that kind of situation where, for many reasons, for ecological reasons, certainly, for creating the spirit of a company, for saving money, for that we go back to that kind of time. It's very difficult to achieve because singers, the great singers, are in demand all over the world. Of course, yes, you say, well, we can use technology that, we can stream performances and that for people, but people can see the performances from their living rooms. It's not the same as seeing them live. When you saw Pavarotti live, you remembered it for the rest of your life. There's no question. And so I think this question of touring, as I said before, the big orchestras touring as much as they did, that might have to change. Also because on the short term, many of the organizations are in financial bloodbaths and need to save money, frankly, on the short term. Look, let's be careful not to say that everything that was done in the past was bad. I think I think that maybe it needs a correction. The amount. I think the impulses have been good. We want to get more and more people to see and hear things. There's nothing wrong with that. Let's hope that we're able to do that, and we can afford to do that, and that organizations are able to survive these next few months so that we can, if not get back to normal, have learned from this experience and create a new normal. I mean, we're not stupid.
Yeah, so I'm sure. So you're talking about just getting. This will change the balance. Maybe we're a little bit out of balance. Maybe we need to get back into a little bit of balance. That there's not quite as much of that intercontinental touring, but there still will be touring. And do you feel? I mean, this is a practical thing. You know, you're talking about this in terms of, and I'm sure you're right that many organizations, they're just trying to survive at the moment, and that the huge expense of doing a big tour, you know, when American orchestras come over to Europe, it seems to cost a fortune. Now, on the other hand, our question here is also mentioning the word ecological. And so do you feel that this is just a practical aspect to do with money, or do you think that actually organizations are or should be thinking a little more about ecological things? Is that something that's a matter of importance for you, or do you think it will be of importance?
I I have a kind of maybe silly utopian idea that the Earth should be given short breathers, like let's not move for a week. Let's, like the whole country. Let's say this week is dedicated to the Earth, so the Earth can breathe. You know what's wrong with something like that? Because I don't think anything's going to stop the world from moving. But I do think we've learned that nature needs
A breather.
it just needs to be quiet for a period, and so I think that imposed periods like this, although it might sound maybe fascist or, or you know, or dictatorial, I think wouldn't be a bad idea for our ecology.
Yeah. So utopia or dystopia, but this is a really interesting thing from you. So you're suggesting, you know, give the Earth a breather week now and then. It's an interesting idea. It's a bit like dieting, isn't it? That instead of just not ever having anything you want, just have periods when you decide to be sensible, and then give the body a rest, give the Earth a rest. I think that's an interesting idea. Okay, this is probably a new idea that I've never heard this before. So I think you've got a new movement here, Tony. This is an interesting, very interesting idea. Look, it's great talking to you. It's very interesting. There's a word that's come up three times you said three times, and that's utopia. And you know, I have this you have this amazing idealism, which I think is so important. Where does that come from? Where does your idealism come from, and how do you protect it in this incredibly busy life that you have?
Well, look how privileged I am to be experiencing close up the sounds and structures and atmospheres and orchestra reaction to those things I just mentioned. How lucky am I, you know, to be living this life, and sometimes I can even just sit at the piano by myself and have nobody around and be really, really, really happy. Well, isn't that great, you know? And
Yeah, absolutely.
it's the music, Marshall. It's the music.
Yeah, no, well, it's great, and one sees it. It's so palpable. Actually, Peter Stark, by the way, has just come back with. He's put one word, an exclamation mark, and I think I understand what he said. Sunday exclamation mark, and I was thinking about that as you were talking, which is that we used to live our lives. I mean, society, years ago, decades, centuries ago, where Sunday was that day of rest, and I guess it must have given the planet a day of rest. So. I think, unfortunately, we need more than one day a week, probably, but it's an interesting idea. Look, Tony, it's been really fascinating talking to you. Thank you so much. You're an inspiration for young players, I'm quite sure. And we look forward to seeing more of you when you can tour more, when you're doing more concerts. And thank you so much for being with us for this time.
Thank you for this opportunity, Mark. Great pleasure.
That's great. Thank you. Thank you very much, Tony. And for anybody who wants to tune in this afternoon, I think at 5:30 CET, we are having another of these sessions with composers Hannah Kendall, our composer in residence, and Joan Tower. Hope you can see us then. But as for now, thank you so much. Thank you, Tony. Thanks for everybody who's been with us and for those questions, interesting questions. Thanks.